Tracy.
Hey, y'all. I'm here. That's my sister, Emily Guy Birkin. She doesn't use a hyphen.
And that's my sister, Tracy Guy Decker, and she does use a hyphen.
Yeah. And this is Lightbringers.
Yes. This is where we illuminate the deeper meaning of the crime-solving devil TV show.
And yes, we are
We're overthinking it.
Yeah, we are. We are. So today we're going to talk about episodes 104 and 105. Manly Whatnots is 104 and Sweet Kicks is 105. So yeah, so we were actually, just before we pressed record, we were talking about something that you wanted to talk about, manly whatnots. Yes. So I'm going to let you lay that out for our audience, and then I'll pick back up where we were before we hit record.
So Manly Whatnots is the episode where we first see Lucifer is vulnerable around Chloe. And it's the first time he is vulnerable around Chloe because he gets shot in front of her in the pilots and shrugs it off, no problem. So what's interesting is upon this rewatch is noticing that now there's never any straight answer on exactly why he's vulnerable around Chloe. There is the theory that since angels self-actualize, his emotional vulnerability around her is self-actualized as physical vulnerability. And I think that is basically what the writers are going for.
Which we don't get that theory for many episodes, like into future seasons.
Season 5, I think, is where that theory comes about. So what's fascinating to me is that in the same episode where he is physically vulnerable, is the first time you see Lucifer truly emotionally vulnerable, and it's with Chloe, and it's when she shows up at the penthouse and he appears naked just to be like, "Hey, turnabout's fair play, you know."
Tit for tat, he says.
Yeah, you can see me. And she's very uncomfortable. Is like, "Please put something on," and he wraps a Afghan or something around himself so he's covered, and he spins around so she can take in all the glory that is 6 feet 4 inches of Tom Ellis, and she sees the scars on his back from where he cut off his wings, and she immediately goes from like uncomfortable, embarrassed, annoyed at him to like
also a little bit prurient. There's a little bit of
there is some prurience. Yeah, well,
she's still peeking.
Yeah. Can you blame her?
No, I cannot.
But she immediately goes from that to concerned to like, what happened to you? And
who did this to you?
Who did this to you? And like, she tries to kind of like, are you okay? And he grabs her arm and
she tries to touch the scar.
Yes.
He whips around really quickly and grabs her wrist.
Mm-hmm. And what's really fascinating about that scene is it is the first time, and you don't because we binged it, watching it originally, it's the first time you see him without any of his masks on. And he seems even surprised by it.
Yeah, he's disconcerted by it. He immediately goes and puts that. It's like, I should get dressed.
Yeah.
I think that moment when he has her wrist in his hand as well, like it's a gif. Like, I see it on Twitter, like from the Lucifans whom I follow. And in my memory, there's a bit of like, there's an abruptness to it, this sort of like, stop. But in reality, he plays it. It's not like that. He says, don't, please, without that edge of like, how dare you? There's no sort of like, there's no anger edge to the way he delivers that line. It really is more like a genuine, please don't. Yeah. And I think that's really supports your point about genuine vulnerability in that moment. It's not vulnerability covered over by machismo, or covered over by, humor, the sly asides or the humor or anything else. It's just a straight up authentic, don't, please.
Yeah. And it's interesting in terms of, how this is written. So apparently none of his lovers have ever expressed concern presumably.
Well, they haven't been, the wings haven't been gone super long time.
Well, it's 5 years. We later find out.
We later find out it's been 5 years.
It's been 5 years.
And he is a prolific lover.
He is.
So yes. None of his other human lovers have ever, presumably.
So this is clearly like there is some give and take here in that she is seeing him and seeing beyond the mask that he shares with the world, that he's comfortable in. So what I was telling you before we started recording that I find so impressive with the writers is that I think it's very clear they had this idea in mind that he is vulnerable around Chloe because physically, because he is emotionally vulnerable around her. And we get that a little bit later in the season where he says, oh, it appears you make me vulnerable too. We'll get to that in a little bit. But we don't know why. We don't know about the self-actualization or anything like that. What I find impressive is that with TV, you don't have any guarantee of an end date. You don't have any guarantee of additional seasons. You know, you write a pilot, you don't have a guarantee it's going to be picked up. You get the first season, you don't have any guarantee you're going to get a second. And so they are playing this long game of like what makes him vulnerable. And they give like other people have theories. Like once you get to season 3, you see that Cain has a theory that there's something about Chloe that makes Celestials vulnerable. Or, you know, maybe it's the fact that Chloe is in love with Lucifer, which I was reading some AV Club reviews of season 3 as it came out, or contemporaneous with it when it came out, saying like, well, that would just suggest that Chloe was in love with Lucifer as of the 4th episode. And we're like, yeah, that's absolutely not the case. And what I love is that it is a cool idea of what it is that makes Lucifer vulnerable. And the writers did not feel the need to highlight it and point arrows at it and have flashing lights to be like, hey, isn't this cool? Which I feel like a lot of writers would want to do, particularly since you don't know what you're going to get in terms of, are you going to be able to finish telling the story? So it's just a matter of, I am impressed when writers are playing the long game with a genre or a medium where you don't necessarily get a long story.
Yeah. And so the thing I was going to push back on you about before we hit record was that may well be exactly what's happening. And I'm thinking of other, specifically science fiction shows, and I'm thinking Battlestar Galactica, which I know is not one of your shows, but in Battlestar Galactica, there's this weird thing that happens where Starbuck comes back. I'm talking about the reboot, the most recent, which also featured Trisha Helfer, actually.
It does, yes. She has like a cottage industry of playing not quite humans.
Yeah, very sexy, not quite humans.
Very sexy, not quite humans.
Yeah. So Starbuck like comes back from the dead and like has no memory of it. And like, it's not clear how that happened. And like, it's just this weird, huge mystery that like, based on the way they wrapped it up, like I was left with the impression that the writers didn't know how it happened either. And they just kind of were like, oh, she's gone now. Like, I don't know. It's a mystery, you know, like I was left with the impression from Galactica that like, it worked for the story. They wanted her back. They wanted this mystery and sort of spirituality that was like, I mean, basically out of character, but like they wanted this, all of the things that came with it, but they didn't actually have an answer for the why. And so there was, I mean, if there had been a why that had been neatly wrapped up in the end of Galactica, then I could have said they did the exact same thing, or they did a similar thing to what you're suggesting. The showrunners did for Lucifer from these episodes that we're talking about today, because I was left with this sense of like, yeah, the writers didn't know either. It makes me like, I'm just thinking of like, I would hesitate to compare myself to the showrunners from the show because I think they're really, really good and
so talented.
And I can imagine my, you know, less well-crafted stuff that I write where I sit down to write and I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work out, but I know this thing. And like, sometimes I don't like sometimes the answer reveals itself as I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I wonder if, I mean, like the self-actualization piece is so beautiful. It's just so lovely, that we get not until the 5th season, which they didn't expect to have, right? Because Fox canceled them. Like that was the result of the Save Lucifer thing. So I wonder if it was sort of I mean, who was it? Who was it that said, good luck is the residue of design? Was that Oscar Wilde? Who I don't know who said that. I'm sorry, whoever you are, I apologize for not crediting you appropriately. I sort of think maybe that this solution that is the long game is actually the residue of good design, but not like Joe and Ildy and the other writers were sitting around in 2016 going, yeah, and angels self-actualize. Like, I'm just putting it out there.
Here's the thing though, because we have other examples of them as self-actualizing. So like with long before we get to where they use those terms. So in the 2nd season with Amenadiel losing his wings.
Yes, that's true.
And so like
which I've also read was solving a problem because the CG for those wings was so expensive.
Okay. Well, that's because the same thing with the time slowing. That's an expensive special effect. And I actually, one of the things I noticed in this rewatch is that they do like the big scale time slowing, but then when Amenadiel, gosh, which episode was it? Amenadiel comes to him in the penthouse and he's thrown an apple in the air, and that's the only thing that slows because his guests are still asleep. I'm like, that is a lot easier than slowing time in Lux.
Yeah.
So
or on the street or whatever. Yeah. So I mean, and I gotta say it, sometimes certain people, certain divinities work in mysterious ways.
Yeah. And I will say, like, one of the things that I find fascinating about television, even more than movies, because again, it's that ongoing aspect of it. You're filming stuff without knowing when it will end, how it will end, if you have more seasons, all of that, is how collaborative it becomes. So like Lucifer's ring that he wears on the middle finger of his right hand, is something that Tom Ellis, when he was getting dressed for, getting costumed for the first, for the pilot, like, I feel like I need something else. And he found that in like the costume shop and was like, yeah, this is perfect. And then it became a major
storyline
in the 5th season.
Yeah.
So there is some collaborative effort to that, but obviously, unless we ever get a chance to chat with Joe and Ildy, I really did feel like,
please get in touch, Joe and Ildy, but like, please don't hesitate.
Love to hear from you.
All right, carry on.
I really do feel like it is not a coincidence that the first time we in any way see his like charming devil mask slip is also the first time he bleeds.
I agree. I completely agree. I think that is straight up good writing. I don't think that's an accident. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
And I so appreciate how well they do that. And then also, even though, Lucifer's in therapy, he's meeting with Dr. Linda every week. And yet he still has not been himself with Linda. It's not until this moment with Chloe that he is truly the scarred, broken man.
Yeah.
Who says, don't, please.
Yeah.
Oh, my heart.
Yeah, I'm gonna move us on to the other episode that we wanted to talk about, Sweet Kicks, for a moment, because I think that after that sort of window into a, sort of the brokenness of Lucifer in Mainly Whatnots, then in Sweet Kicks, like, he's just an asshole. Like the amount of what's the word I'm looking for? Like belittling that he does of emotion and like sort of the toxic masculinity that he is exuding in Sweet Kicks, like around the Diego and Danny, the characters, like when Diego is emotional about his cousin's death.
Yeah.
And Lucifer's like, is that flop sweat or a tear? What the hell is going on? You know, he doesn't say that, but that's the sentiment. And like he's just a jerk in that episode. And like it becomes cumulative because in that episode he also starts to I mean, we talked about in our last episode, we talked about Lucifer sort of starting to feel some responsibility, maybe kind of a little bit around Allie's death in the would-be Prince of Darkness. And then again, we get that in Sweet Kicks when, because Chloe points it out, he realizes that by granting the favor to
Benny Choi.
Benny, thank you. That Yellow Viper,
damned Yellow Viper to prison. Yes.
So, I mean, it takes Chloe saying it out loud for him to see it, but that actually then that sense of like having kind of been played for some is what drives his final interaction with Benny, in making sure that Benny, you know, is restrained in a, you know, very overly dramatic sort of way, because, you know, Lucifer is a drama king, if nothing else. So anyway, I wanted to kind of, since we're holding both of those episodes, I wanted to kind of contrast that, where we get this glimpse of maybe something besides the jerk persona that we've met, and then it's right back full force again in the next episode, with the way that he reacts to basically any display of emotion in that episode from Diego and Danny, or from Viper. It just
from Dan.
From Dan, from Hector, who is the actual trigger man.
Yeah. Well, and it makes sense in terms of how someone as immature as Lucifer would respond to having a moment of emotional vulnerability. Like, you know, like you got to overcorrect.
Yeah, that's true. You know, it also, based on our last episode where we talked a lot about the racial identity of the cast, like this episode actually delved into that a bit as well, since the Latin Kings and the Asian boys were sort of the two central gangs in the episode, and so a lot of the supporting actors were either Latinx or Asian. It's interesting just to note based on what we have talked about.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, they were characterized as gang members predominantly.
Although, you know, Yellow Viper was a very sympathetic character.
Yes, completely. And really, I think ultimately noble, because even when Lucifer did his mojo and wanted to know what his deepest desire was, it was just to do his art.
Yeah.
That was what he wanted.
That image of when the Latin Kings and Danny and Diego show up, and he immediately steps in front of his kids and puts his arms out. It reminded me, I remember you and I talking about Harry Potter, when Snape immediately stood in front of the three kids in Prisoner of Azkaban to protect them. So, you know, that's just such a clear indication of what his priorities are.
You know, it's really interesting, since we're talking about a show called Lucifer, and when you said that, I immediately put my arms out. Like that's what the actor does. Like I don't think that's a mistake either.
Yeah.
Like, there's a very clear sort of like Christ-like moment, and especially since he is sort of one of the few characters that we ever get, you know, who's just good. And also then has that moment of a Christ-like symbol. That's really, I hadn't noticed that until I did that just now.
Yeah. That's I'm
not sure where to put that, but it occurred to me.
That's a good question.
So I'm sharing it with y'all.
So, but that was something that I thought was interesting also, in that Lucifer goes from like, hey, let's get a gang war going, to immediately like
get the kids out.
Get the kids out.
With his behind his back finger.
Yeah. And I should have, I wish I'd made a note of what happened immediately before he's just like, oh yeah, get the kids out. Because he really was like, yes, danger, gang war, this is exciting. And then I think Chloe says something to him like, you do know you're not helping, or something like that. That he like gets out of himself for a minute.
She does. She says, you know, you're not helping.
Yeah. And I also appreciated her like, all right, you've had your hero moment, now stay out of the line of fire.
And he says, okay.
Yeah.
And then Maze, your bartender is a ninja. Of course she is.
It's one of my favorite lines.
Maze is just so. Actually, let's talk about Maze for a second, because I think like we knew that she was like a demon. Like in the previous 4 episodes, we knew she was a demon. She followed him from hell. But like this episode makes really plain the degree to which she is a servant, right? Like where he says, I know you'll always be there to protect me because that's what you were created for. And then she does. I mean, she does it, you know, with a side of sass.
Yeah.
But she does. And I think that's really like, it lays a foundation for the growth of Maze that I think is really significant. I mean, even the moment where she's like creeping on Chloe sleeping in the chair at the end of this episode,
and you see her face,
and you see her actual demon face in the mirror. Yeah. So, but she doesn't hurt Chloe, right? So I think we're already starting to see her also changing, because based on the way I don't think she was meant to have killed any of the gang members that she incapacitated in that episode. But she didn't hesitate to break them collarbones and fracture tibias and whatever. Like, you know, Lucifer's given us the play-by-play of what she's doing. And she's there. Well, talk about being vulnerable. Chloe is asleep and ultimately leaves and does not interfere. And so and that's right after we've been shown that she exists to protect him, and she feels it is her job to protect him, whether or not he sees the danger coming. So I think there, you know, that whole arc with Maze really plants the seed of her future story arc, which again, like to your point at the beginning of our conversation, like showrunners don't know if they're going to get a chance to explore that. And you know, I don't know, it's for me, it really, this episode really problematized Maze in a way that she hadn't been previously. Like she was like, the way she kind of laughed at the identity theft, you know, who's doing things that were totally out of character. Like she enjoyed Lucifer's embarrassment in a way that led me to believe they had a different sort of relationship than this episode makes clear. Right. So
I will say one of the things in terms of Maze changing is she is getting some agency, even though it's in a direction that we as the audience don't want to see, by meeting with Amenadiel and saying like, you know, I want to go home and it's for his own good. And does she really believe that, or does she just want what she wants?
Right. Which she's never been allowed to do before.
Which she's never been allowed to. Yeah. Like it's never been about what she wants. Which they say that explicitly later in the season and early season 2 is when she's like, why is it never about me?
Right. Well, I feel like throughout the series.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember. Well, I'm sure we'll get to it, but when she wants him to pour her a drink.
Yes. Yeah. And so that I think there is that kind of problematic, it's introduced here, but then it's also like subverted a little bit with these, and I can't remember which episode where she met with Amenadiel, if it was in Manly Whatnots or Sweet Kicks.
Yeah, I think it's in Sweet Kicks.
I think you're right. I think it is. It's the problem with watching 2 in a row.
Right.
You get them mixed up.
And actually, sorry, that scene where she meets with him in the coffee shop is where we first see the hint of what hell is. Because she says all of these, look at them all on their laptops, torturing themselves with dreams that they know won't come true. Like, so the idea that the souls in hell torture themselves that's the first time that's kind of even hinted at. Because previously, I mean, she is a torturer. Like that's the whole point. Like,
so that's one thing I do want to bring up, how much another show that also started running in 2016, The Good Place, feels like it is in conversation with Lucifer.
Agreed.
Because hell in The Good Place is where you torture yourself, basically.
Yeah.
And that is very fascinating to me, that's the 2 separate TV shows would come up with this same kind of just fundamental idea of what it is, what hell would be like.
Yes, I agree. It's an old idea, right? True, like the parable of the long spoons. Do you know the parable of the long spoons?
Where you can't reach for yourself, and so you have to feed other people.
So hell and heaven are identical. You sit around, and there's plenty of food to eat, but there are only these like long spoons. They're too long for you to use them for yourself. And in hell, they're sitting around like trying to feed themselves, and they can't. In heaven, exact same scene, but they're feeding each other. Attributed to Rabbi Chaim of Ramshashak, although it's been in other sources. So, yeah. And anyway, this idea that we torture ourselves, either because of our lack of regard for one another in the parable of the long spoons, or because of our own guilt and
it's interesting. If that parable, I'd only heard the hell version of it. So I'd never like.
Oh, you didn't get the flip side is that heaven is exactly the same, identical room, just we feed one another.
But what's interesting is that, again, that gets to what this show is about, in listening to and responding to others.
Yeah.
Because as Lucifer grows, he learns to do that. He learns to not see humans as objects, like we talked about last episode.
Yeah.
And recognizes that I feed you, you feed me. Everybody's happy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting.
I think that's a good place to wrap us up.
Yeah, I think so.
I've overthunk enough for now. That joke never gets old.
It never does get old. I had another pet peeve in place, and I can't remember what it was. Oh, I know what the pet peeve was. He puts his fingers in the blood and he tastes it.
Yeah.
That is so gross.
Not human, surprisingly. I don't think they don't do that again. But yeah, that's pretty gross.
That is so gross. And like, that's a thing that happens like in TV shows, like in My Beloved X-Files, there's at least once where Mulder like puts his fingers inside. I don't think he licks it, but he sniffs it. It's just like, there's got to be a better way of determining what this is. Same thing with, sometimes you'll see on crime shows, they'll be like cocaine, and they'll be like, yep, cocaine. It's just like,